I still remember the day my world came crashing down. I was 35 years old, living in a small town in Ohio, with 2 kids and a wife who had started to lose faith in me. I had just lost my job at the factory, a place I thought I'd retire from. Because the company downsized and moved operations overseas, I walked out of that building with a cardboard box full of my belongings. And in that moment, I felt smaller than I'd ever felt in my life. It wasn't just about the paycheck. It was about the shame. In America, especially back in those days, a man's worth was tied to his work. If you weren't working, you weren't providing. And if you weren't providing, you weren't a man. At least that's what I believed. I sat in my old pickup truck in the parking lot for nearly an hour, gripping the steering wheel, trying not to cry. But eventually, the tears came anyway. I drove home that evening knowing I'd have to look my family in the eyes and admit I had failed. My wife's disappointment wasn't loud. It was silent. Silent enough to break me even more. The bills stacked up, the mortgage notice came in, and I started drowning in a sea of debt collectors' phone calls. Every knock at the door felt like a reminder of how far I had fallen. But here's the thing I learned. Rock bottom has a strange way of giving you clarity. When you're humiliated, when you've got nothing left to lose, that's when you find out what you're really made of. I realized no one was coming to save me, not the government, not some rich uncle, not even luck. It was on me. That night, lying awake on a mattress that felt more like concrete, I made myself a promise. I would never let my family go through this again. I didn't know how, I didn't know when, but I swore I'd rise from the ashes. Listen, sometimes the lowest moments of your life are the foundation for your greatest comeback. Don't run from the pain, use it. The weeks after losing my job were some of the darkest of my life. Every morning I'd sit at the kitchen table with a cup of cheap coffee, staring at the classified section of the newspaper. Page after page of jobs I wasn't qualified for, or jobs that paid less than what it cost to keep the lights on. My kids would come down for breakfast, their eyes too young to understand, but sharp enough to notice the tension in the air. One morning my daughter asked me, "Daddy, are we going to be okay?" And I froze. How do you answer that when you're not sure yourself? I forced a smile and told her yes, but inside I was breaking. The truth was, I felt humiliated. In America, neighbors talk. When you lose your job, people whisper. At church, men I used to shake hands with now looked at me with pity. That pity cut deeper than any insult. I tried to hide it, but the stress was eating me alive. I drank too much. I yelled when I shouldn't have. My marriage started to crack under the pressure. I felt like a ghost in my own home, there, but not really present. And every rejection letter, every "we'll call you back" that never came, was another nail in the coffin of my pride. But here's what I learned during those days. Humiliation can either bury you or build you. I started keeping a notebook, writing down every painful thought, page after page of anger, shame, and regret. But after a while, something shifted. Those pages weren't just my complaints. They were lessons. I began to see patterns where I had been lazy, where I had depended too much on one job, where I had let fear stop me from trying new things. It was painful to admit, but the truth was simple. I had been living safe, not strong. I realized if I wanted to change my life, I had to first change myself. That night, I tore out a page from that notebook and wrote down 5 words. I will rebuild my life. I taped it above the bathroom mirror so it was the first thing I saw every morning. Lesson: humiliation isn't the end. Sometimes it's the teacher you didn't know you needed. If you can face the mirror and own your mistakes, you can start again. It's funny how life pushes you when you least expect it. One afternoon, after another failed job interview, I stopped by a small diner. I didn't have much money, so I ordered the cheapest thing on the menu, a cup of soup. As I sat there, I overheard 2 men talking in the booth behind me. They weren't whispering, they were speaking loud, full of energy. They were talking about starting a small landscaping business. Nothing big, just mowing lawns and trimming hedges. At first I laughed to myself. Here I was, a man who had worked in a factory for nearly 2 decades, and now I was listening to strangers talk about mowing grass. But then it hit me. Work is work. Dignity doesn't come from the title on your business card. It comes from the effort you put in. That night I couldn't shake the thought. I didn't have money, I didn't have connections, but I did have something. An old pickup truck and a rusty lawnmower sitting in the shed. The next morning, I put a handwritten sign in the truck. Lawn care. Affordable prices. My wife rolled her eyes, but I told her, "Honey, we either sink or we swim. I'm not going to drown sitting still." I started knocking on doors around the neighborhood. Most people said no. Some slammed the door before I even finished my pitch, but by the end of the day, one older lady gave me a chance. "The other companies charge too much," she said. "If you can do it for less, you've got yourself a deal." I'll never forget cutting that first lawn. My hands were blistered, my back ached, and sweat poured down my face. But when I loaded that mower back into the truck, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. She paid me $40, and I drove home grinning like a kid on Christmas morning. It wasn't much, but it was mine. My first dollar earned not as an employee, but as a man taking a risk. That night I taped that $40 bill right next to the note on my bathroom mirror. Every morning I'd see it, and it reminded me, this is just the beginning. Lesson: don't wait for the perfect opportunity. Create one. Sometimes your first step will be small, even clumsy. But one small step in the right direction is better than standing still forever. The first lawn gave me hope, but hope doesn't pay the bills on its own. As I tried to grow that tiny lawn care hustle, reality came crashing back in. I didn't have money for proper equipment. My old mower broke down twice in the same week, and I had to fix it with duct tape and prayer. My truck leaked oil so badly that some customers complained about stains on their driveways. Every day felt like a new test from God himself. On top of that, competition was fierce. Bigger companies with shiny trucks and uniforms laughed at me. One even told me, "Old man, you'll never last a season." Their words stung, but they also fueled me. I decided right then I'd outwork every single one of them, even if I had nothing but grit in my toolbox. There were days I wanted to quit. After 12 hours in the sun, pushing that mower across uneven yards, my body screamed at me. My friends told me I was wasting my time. My wife questioned if this was really the path forward. The doubts piled up higher than the grass clippings. But here's what I realized. Every obstacle was a teacher. When the mower broke, I learned how to repair engines from YouTube videos and old manuals. When customers doubted me, I learned how to sell myself, not just the service. I promised people reliability. I'll be here rain or shine. And little by little, they started to believe me. One Saturday, I had 6 lawns lined up back to back. The mower broke halfway through, and I almost called it quits. But then I thought about my daughter's question. "Daddy, are we going to be okay?" I couldn't face her with another failure. I borrowed a neighbor's mower, swallowed my pride, and finished every single job. That day, I earned $240, more than the factory ever paid me in a single shift. That night, lying in bed sore and exhausted, I felt something new: resilience. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was learning to fight. Lesson: life will throw obstacles in your way, not to stop you, but to shape you. Don't curse the struggle. Every challenge is sharpening the blade you'll use to cut through your future. It took nearly a year of sweat, blisters, and more rejection than I could count before things started to change. I remember the exact moment it shifted. I was mowing a yard on the edge of town when a man in a suit stopped by. He wasn't there for the lawn. He was a real estate agent showing the house to a potential buyer. After I finished, he walked over and said, "You work hard. Do you take on bigger contracts?" I didn't, not really, but I looked him dead in the eye and said, "Yes, sir, I do." That one conversation turned into my first commercial job, maintaining several properties he managed. It wasn't glamorous, but it was steady work. And steady work was gold. That contract allowed me to buy a used trailer, upgrade my equipment, and hire my first helper, a young kid fresh out of high school. He reminded me of myself at that age, hungry but unsure. I told him, "Son, hard work doesn't just feed you, it shapes you." Funny thing is, I think I was saying it as much to myself as I was to him. Slowly, people stopped seeing me as the broke old guy with a rusty mower and started seeing me as a business owner. I walked taller, I spoke with more confidence. I even wore a collared shirt instead of a torn t-shirt. It may sound small, but in America, image matters. And when you start acting like the man you want to become, people begin treating you that way. One evening, as I sat in my truck counting the week's earnings, I realized something powerful. I was no longer begging for a paycheck. I was creating one. That shift in mindset was more important than the money itself. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was building. It didn't mean life was suddenly easy. Bills still piled up, the truck still broke down, and mistakes still cost me sleep. But now, for the first time, the wins were bigger than the losses. Lesson: opportunity doesn't always come dressed in gold. Sometimes it shows up in a suit at the edge of a lawn. Say yes, even when you're not fully ready. Growth lives on the other side of risk. With that first contract under my belt, something inside me shifted. I was no longer thinking like a man just trying to pay bills. I was thinking like a builder. I started to see lawns, not just as yards of grass, but as opportunities. Every neighborhood was a potential marketplace, every handshake a seed for growth. I realized I couldn't do it all alone. My body was wearing down, and my time was limited. If I wanted this little hustle to become a business, I needed people. That's when I hired my second worker, a single dad, just like me, who was desperate for a second chance. I'll never forget the look in his eyes when I told him, "You've got a job." That day, I wasn't just saving my life. I was putting food on another family's table. But expansion came with new problems. Managing people was harder than mowing grass. One worker quit without notice, another damaged a customer's property and almost cost me the contract. I had no manual, no college degree, no MBA. All I had was instinct and grit, so I learned the hard way. I read business books from the library, listened to mentors at church, and studied how bigger companies operated. The first time I printed business cards with my company name on it, Reliable Lawn Care, I felt 10 feet tall. It wasn't just about the grass, it was about building a reputation. In America, reputation is currency. If people trust you, they'll pay you. I started landing bigger clients, small offices, rental properties, even a local school. Each new contract was another brick in the foundation I was building. Still, fear never fully left me. Every time I signed a deal, I wondered, what if I fail? What if I can't keep up? But here's what I learned. Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's moving forward in spite of it. One night, sitting at the kitchen table, my wife looked at me differently. She wasn't rolling her eyes anymore. She said softly, "Maybe you really can pull this off." That moment meant more than any paycheck. Lesson: growth requires risk, and risk requires faith. Don't wait until you're ready. You'll never feel ready. Build as you go, and let faith carry you where fear tries to hold you back. Just when I thought things were finally moving in the right direction, life hit me with another blow. That summer, a storm rolled through Ohio, the kind that rips trees out of the ground and floods streets overnight. In just a few hours, half my customer base called to cancel service. Yards were destroyed, people were dealing with bigger problems than grass, and contracts dried up like water in the desert. To make matters worse, my old truck finally gave up on me. One morning on my way to a job, it coughed, sputtered, and died right in the middle of the road. I sat there behind the wheel, fists pounding on the steering wheel, feeling like God had forgotten me again. I was back at square one. No truck, no work, no money. Debt piled up fast, credit card bills, late fees, past due notices. They flooded the mailbox like vultures circling over me. One night, I sat at the kitchen table with my head in my hands, staring at a stack of overdue bills, and I whispered, "Maybe I'm not cut out for this." For the first time since I started, I thought about quitting. But then something shifted. I looked at my kids' faces across the table. They weren't asking for toys or vacations. They just wanted dinner and a roof over their heads. That was my wake-up call. I couldn't give up. Not now. I swallowed my pride and asked a friend at church if I could borrow his truck for a few weeks. It wasn't easy to ask, but to my surprise, he handed me the keys without hesitation. "Just promise me you'll keep pushing," he said. That truck kept me afloat long enough to land a few cleanup jobs from the storm. Here's the truth I learned in that season. Setbacks aren't signs to stop. They're tests to see how badly you want it. Quitting is always easier, but easy doesn't build legacies. By the end of that month, I had scraped enough together to buy a beat-up used truck at an auction. It wasn't pretty, but it was mine. And when I drove it home, with rust on the doors and smoke in the exhaust, it felt like driving a Cadillac. Not because of what it was, but because of what it represented. Survival. Lesson: life will knock you down again and again, but every setback is a setup for a stronger comeback. Don't curse the storm. Learn how to dance in the rain. After the storm and the struggle with the truck, I kept grinding. Day after day, I showed up with that beat-up vehicle and my patched-up mower. Customers started noticing one thing about me. I didn't quit. Rain, shine, or broken equipment, I was there. And in America, consistency is a language people understand. One morning, I got a call from the same real estate agent who'd given me that first commercial contract. He said, "I've got a bigger job for you. A housing development is about to open, and they need a crew to maintain the entire property." My heart stopped. This wasn't a single lawn, or even a few offices. This was dozens of houses every week. It was the kind of contract that could either make me or break me. I'll be honest, I was terrified. I didn't have enough workers, not enough equipment, and certainly not enough money in the bank to handle the upfront costs. But I remembered the lesson I had taped on my mirror. I will rebuild my life. So I said yes. The first few weeks were chaos. I was up at 5 a.m., organizing crews, fixing machines, and juggling paperwork. There were nights I fell asleep at the kitchen table, with invoices scattered around me. My wife worried I was pushing myself into an early grave, but I told her, "This is the moment we've been waiting for. I can't let fear steal it from me." Slowly, things started clicking. The more properties we handled, the smoother the process became. Customers noticed how clean the lawns looked, how dependable the crew was, and word started spreading. Before I knew it, I had more calls than I could handle. For the first time, I had to turn business away. The day I signed that contract, I didn't just gain a client. I gained confidence. I realized that small hustles can turn into big businesses if you're willing to take the leap. That deal became the foundation for my company's growth, and it proved something to me. I wasn't just surviving anymore, I was climbing. Lesson: when opportunity knocks, don't let fear answer the door. Say yes, even when it scares you. Growth always feels like chaos before it feels like success. Success is a strange thing. From the outside, people see the shiny parts, the bigger truck, the new equipment, the team wearing matching shirts with the company name on them. Neighbors started nodding at me differently, like I'd finally made it. But behind the curtain, it was chaos. The bigger the contracts, the bigger the headaches. Suddenly, I wasn't just mowing lawns. I was managing payroll, taxes, insurance, and schedules. I went from a man with calloused hands to a man buried under paperwork. And I'll admit, I wasn't ready. There were days when I thought the business was running me, not the other way around. One of my first big mistakes came when I underbid a contract. I wanted to prove I could handle it, so I gave them a price so low I barely broke even. My workers got paid, but I didn't. For 2 months, I worked like a dog and took home nothing. It nearly broke me. I remember lying in bed thinking I went from broke and humiliated to broke and exhausted. But here's the thing about mistakes: they're tuition. Painful, expensive, but priceless if you learn. That contract taught me the value of knowing my worth. I promised myself I'd never sell myself short again, and from that moment forward, I charged what the work was worth, not a penny less. Managing people was another battle. Some workers showed up late, others quit when things got tough. I realized that building a company wasn't just about finding hands. It was about finding hearts that believed in the vision. So I started investing in people. I didn't just pay them, I taught them what I was learning: discipline, pride, and perseverance. Little by little, the right people stayed. One night, while balancing books at the kitchen table, my wife brought me coffee and said, "I've never seen you fight this hard for anything." I smiled and replied, "That's because I finally found something worth fighting for." Lesson: growth isn't glamorous. It's messy, it's painful, and it will test every weakness you have. But every mistake, every sleepless night, is sharpening you into the leader you're meant to be. Success was finally within reach, but with it came a new kind of danger: temptation. When the money started flowing, I felt like a different man. For the first time in my life, I wasn't worried about whether the lights would stay on. I could buy my kids nicer clothes, take my wife out to dinner, even put a little away in savings. It felt good. Too good. That's when a man approached me with an offer. He said, "You've built a solid business. Why not double it? I've got an investment opportunity, quick returns, big profit." He painted pictures of fast money, easy wealth. My heart raced, just listening. I was tired of grinding day and night. Maybe, I thought, this was my chance to skip the hard part. I put in more money than I should have. Money I couldn't afford to lose. Weeks passed, and the promised returns never came. I called him, no answer. Stopped by his office, the doors were locked. My stomach sank. I'd been scammed. That night I sat in the driveway, gripping the steering wheel of my truck, shaking with anger. I wasn't just mad at him. I was furious with myself. How could I, after everything I'd been through, fall for something like that? The shame was worse than the money lost. I had risked my family's future for greed. But here's the truth I learned. Temptation will always test you when you're on the climb. The devil doesn't come to you dressed in red horns. He comes dressed in opportunity. That mistake nearly broke me, but it also humbled me. From that day forward, I swore I'd build wealth the slow, honest way. No shortcuts, no easy money. It took months to recover, but I worked harder than ever. Every loan, every property, every handshake became a reminder. Trust is earned, not bought. My wife told me, "Maybe you needed this lesson." She was right. Painful as it was, it stripped away my arrogance and sharpened my focus. Lesson: in life and in business, beware of shortcuts. If something sounds too good to be true, it usually is. Real success takes time, discipline, and integrity, and those are things no scam can steal. The year after that scam nearly broke me became the year that built me. I went into January with nothing but grit and a burning fire in my chest. I told myself, if I survived humiliation, if I survived losing my job, if I survived being scammed, then nothing is going to stop me now. I tightened up every part of the business. No more sloppy contracts, no more guessing. I sat down with an accountant for the first time in my life. At first, I was embarrassed. Here I was, a man in his 40s at the time, barely understanding taxes and payroll. But I swallowed my pride and learned. That step alone saved me thousands. Then something amazing happened. A school district put out a bid for maintaining all their athletic fields. Football fields, baseball diamonds, parks. It was massive, bigger than anything I'd ever dreamed of handling. My hands shook when I filled out the paperwork. The competitors were big companies with polished presentations. And then there was me, an old pickup, a crew of 4, and a dream. But when they asked me why they should choose us, I told them the truth. We may not be the biggest, but nobody will outwork us. When those kids show up to play on those fields, I'll make sure it looks like the Super Bowl every time. A week later, I got the call. We had won the contract. The day I drove past those fields with my crew, watching the grass shine under the sun, I felt something I can't explain. It wasn't just pride. It was redemption. The same man who once couldn't pay his bills was now trusted with one of the largest contracts in the county. That year, the business exploded. We doubled in size, bought new equipment, and for the first time, I paid myself a real salary. I even surprised my wife with a second-hand SUV, nothing fancy, but paid in cash. When she cried behind the wheel, I knew this wasn't just my victory, it was ours. Lesson: your breakthrough will come in the very area where you once felt unqualified. Don't let fear of being too small stop you. Hard work, honesty, and consistency can outshine the biggest competitors. People love to talk about success, but they rarely talk about the price it demands. That breakthrough contract with the school district made us look like an overnight success, but in reality, it came with sacrifices that cut deep. My days started before the sun came up and ended long after it went down. I was gone so much that sometimes my kids would be asleep when I left in the morning and asleep again when I got home at night. I missed ball games, school plays, and Sunday dinners. My wife, bless her, carried the weight of the household while I carried the weight of the business. But it created tension. More than once she looked at me and asked, "What good is building an empire if you're never home to enjoy it?" That question haunted me. I told myself I was doing it for them, for my family. But the truth was, there were nights I drove around town long after the work was done, not because I needed to, but because I was addicted to the grind. I was terrified that if I slowed down, everything I had built would collapse. I also paid a price physically. My knees ached, my back screamed, and stress was my constant companion. The doctor warned me, if you don't slow down, your body will make you. But slowing down felt impossible. Every phone call, every job, every opportunity felt like life or death. And yet, in those years, I learned something important. Success isn't just about money or contracts, it's about balance. It's about building something without losing yourself along the way. One evening, after finishing a long job, I came home to find my daughter sitting on the porch. She handed me a drawing she'd made. It was of me, standing next to a lawnmower, with the words, "My daddy works hard." I broke down right there, because in her eyes, I wasn't absent. I was fighting for her future. That gave me the strength to keep going, but also the wisdom to start making room for family. Lesson: every success has a price. Don't sacrifice the people you love on the altar of ambition. Build your dreams, but remember, true wealth is measured in memories, not just money. It's strange how people react when you start climbing out of the hole they once pitied you for. In the early days, folks whispered behind my back, calling me a failure, the guy who lost his factory job and tried to cut grass like some desperate old man. But when the business started growing, when they saw the new trucks, the crews, the contracts, the whispers changed. Some neighbors who once ignored me started acting friendly, asking questions about how business was going. But I could see it in their eyes. Envy. Others muttered, "He got lucky," as if years of sweat and sacrifice could be boiled down to luck. And some even outright said, "He'll crash again, just watch." At first, their words cut deep. I thought success would earn me respect, but instead it brought more doubters. I had to learn the hard truth. Not everyone will celebrate your victory. In fact, the more you rise, the more some people will hope you fall. I'll never forget running into an old co-worker from the factory. He smirked and said, "So you're a businessman now, huh? Cutting grass in a polo shirt doesn't make you Donald Trump." I laughed it off in front of him, but later that night, those words echoed in my head. For a moment, I felt small again, like the humiliated man sitting in his truck outside the factory years ago. But then I realized something. Their doubts weren't about me. They were about themselves. My growth reminded them of what they hadn't done, the risks they hadn't taken, the dreams they had let die. Doubters are often just dreamers who gave up. So I made a choice. I stopped trying to prove myself to anyone but my family and my God. I let my work, my reputation, and my results speak louder than any rumor. Funny thing is, the louder my critics got, the more determined I became. Their doubt became fuel. And every time I signed a new contract or expanded the business, I smiled, knowing I wasn't just proving them wrong, I was proving me right. Lesson: don't let doubters derail you. Their negativity is just fear in disguise. Use it as fuel, not chains. Remember, the higher you climb, the louder the noise. But the view is always worth it. For years, my world revolved around grass, cutting it, trimming it, making it look sharp. But deep down, I knew the business couldn't stay small forever. If I wanted to create real stability, something that could outlast me, I needed to think bigger. The opportunity came when one of my commercial clients, a property manager, pulled me aside after I finished a job. He said, "You do good work on the lawns. Ever thought about handling snow removal in the winter?" I hadn't. Back then, my business practically died when the grass stopped growing. I'd scrape by in the cold months, praying for spring. But that night, I couldn't stop thinking about his question. Why hadn't I thought of it before? In Ohio, snow was as reliable as the sunrise. It didn't matter if the economy was good or bad. Snow always fell. So I took the little savings I had, bought an old plow attachment for my truck, and told that client yes. The first storm of the season nearly broke me. I was up at 3 a.m., freezing in the dark, clearing parking lots and driveways while the world slept. My hands were numb, my back was screaming, and my eyelids begged me to quit. But when the sun rose and I handed that client his bill, I saw something I hadn't seen before: year-round potential. From there, I kept expanding. Landscaping in the spring, lawn care in the summer, leaf cleanup in the fall, snow removal in the winter. I went from surviving season to thriving all year long. And every time I added a new service, I felt less like a lawn guy and more like a real businessman. Of course, the risks grew too. New equipment meant new loans, and expansion meant more mouths to feed on the payroll. There were nights I lay awake, terrified that one bad month could sink it all. But I reminded myself, every big leap I'd ever taken started with fear. And every time, pushing through that fear paid off. Lesson: don't trap yourself in one box. Sometimes growth requires you to look beyond what you're good at today and step into what you could be great at tomorrow. When the business grew beyond just me and a couple of guys, I faced a challenge I never expected: leadership. Cutting grass and shoveling snow was one thing. Leading men and women, guiding their livelihoods, inspiring their trust, that was something else entirely. At first, I thought being the boss meant giving orders. I told people what to do, when to do it, and expected them to follow. Some did, but others pushed back. I noticed morale slipping. People weren't showing up on time, jobs were sloppy, and turnover was constant. One day, after a long shift, a young worker quit on the spot. He looked me in the eyes and said, "You don't get it. You're not leading us. You're just barking orders." That cut deeper than any financial loss. I drove home that night thinking about every boss I'd ever had. Some treated me like a number, others like dirt. And I remembered how small that made me feel. Was I becoming the very thing I hated? So I decided to change. I started talking less and listening more. I asked my crew about their lives, their struggles, their dreams. I realized most of them weren't just there for a paycheck. They wanted dignity, the same thing I once craved when I lost the factory job. I began investing in them, bought better equipment so the work was easier, paid fair wages even when it cut into my profits, and most importantly, I showed them respect. I worked alongside them when things got tough, sweating in the heat, freezing in the snow. Slowly, they stopped seeing me as the boss and started seeing me as a leader. One moment I'll never forget. An older worker pulled me aside and said, "You don't just give us jobs, you give us pride." That's when I realized leadership isn't about power. It's about service. Lesson: True leadership isn't measured by how many people follow your orders. It's measured by how many lives are lifted because you chose to serve instead of command. No matter how high you climb, life always finds a way to shake the ladder. For me, that moment came during the financial crisis of 2008. Overnight, everything changed. Clients who had signed contracts for years suddenly called to cancel. Homeowners said they couldn't afford lawn care anymore, and businesses started slashing expenses. And what's the first thing to go when times get tough? Landscaping. I watched months of booked work vanish like smoke. My phone stopped ringing. My payroll didn't. I still had men who depended on me for their families, but I didn't know how I was going to keep paying them. I remember one Friday, staring at the numbers in my ledger, realizing I had enough in the account for either payroll or my mortgage. Not both. I chose payroll. That weekend, my wife and I sat at the kitchen table, staring at a foreclosure notice. My pride felt shattered all over again. Here I was, the man who had built his life back from the ashes, staring at the possibility of losing our home. I felt like a failure all over again. But then something clicked inside me. Desperation has a way of igniting creativity. If lawns weren't selling, what else could? I started offering cleanup jobs, odd handyman work, anything that kept the trucks moving and the crews fed. We cleared brush, hauled junk, even painted fences. I told my crew, we don't just cut grass, we solve problems. Whatever people need, we'll figure it out. Slowly the phone started ringing again, not for the jobs I was used to, but for the jobs that kept us alive. And in the middle of that storm, I realized something profound. Flexibility is survival. If I had been too proud to shift, the business would have died. But because I adapted, we made it through. It was the ugliest year of my career, but it taught me resilience I didn't know I had. When the economy finally started recovering, my company wasn't just alive. It was tougher than ever. Lesson: crisis will expose your pride or build your resilience. The ones who survive aren't always the strongest. They're the ones who adapt. When the dust of the financial crisis settled, I looked around and realized something powerful. I was still standing. Many bigger companies had folded, their fleets sold off, their offices locked up. But my little company, bruised, battered, scarred, was alive. And that survival gave me an edge. Clients who had once hired the big guys now turned to me. They said things like, "We know you'll show up. We know you'll get it done." That trust was priceless. I built from there, brick by brick, contract by contract. The funny thing about hitting rock bottom is that when you rise again, you rise with wisdom. This time I didn't chase growth recklessly. I grew smart. I built savings for the first time. I invested in reliable trucks and equipment instead of patching together junk. I trained my crew to not just work hard, but to work smart. And slowly we weren't just surviving anymore. We were thriving. One day, I drove past the same factory that had laid me off years earlier. The parking lot was half empty, weeds sprouting through the cracks in the pavement. I pulled over and just stared. That place had once been my cage, the place where I felt like my whole life had been ripped apart. Now, standing there as the owner of a growing company, I realized losing that job was the best thing that ever happened to me. The comeback wasn't just financial, it was personal. My wife, who had carried me through the darkest nights, finally said, "I believe in this. I believe in you." My kids, now older, bragged at school that their dad owned his own business. The man who once hid in shame now stood tall with pride. I'll never forget one Sunday at church, a younger man came up to me and said, "I heard your story. I'm struggling right now. Do you think I can make it like you did?" I put my hand on his shoulder and told him the truth. "Son, if I can rise from nothing, so can you. But you've got to fight like your life depends on it, because it does." Lesson: falling doesn't define you. Rising after the fall does. And when you rise stronger, wiser, and ready for the next storm. By the time I reached my 50s, the little lawn care hustle that started with a rusty mower had become something far bigger than I ever dreamed. We weren't just cutting grass anymore. We were maintaining schools, shopping centres, housing developments, even hospitals. What started with me alone in an old pickup had turned into a fleet of trucks and dozens of employees. But more than the size of the company, it was the mindset that had changed. I stopped thinking like a worker trying to survive and started thinking like a businessman building something that could last beyond me. I realized I didn't just want to build a business. I wanted to build an empire. That meant diversification. I expanded into landscaping design, offering clients more than just maintenance. We created outdoor spaces that people could take pride in. Then came snow removal on a larger scale, city contracts, not just parking lots. And eventually I invested in real estate. Properties that once seemed out of reach became assets that now paid me back month after month. I'll be honest, it was overwhelming at times. Managing multiple crews, handling city bids, and negotiating with banks was a world away from knocking on doors for $40 lawn cuts. But I carried the same grit into those boardrooms that I once carried into the hot summer sun. And surprisingly, it worked. People respected me not because of my degree. I had none, but because of my results. I'll never forget walking into a meeting where a banker said, "Most men your age are winding down, but you're just getting started." And he was right. At nearly 60, I wasn't slowing down. I was finally building the legacy I once thought was impossible. My proudest moment wasn't the trucks, the contracts, or the money. It was when one of my employees, a kid I'd hired fresh out of high school, told me he had saved enough to buy his first home. He said, "You didn't just give me a job, you gave me a future." That, more than anything, made me feel like I'd built something real. Lesson: an empire isn't measured only in dollars or buildings. It's measured in the lives you impact, the opportunities you create, and the legacy you leave behind. As I sit here now, a man in his 60s, I can't help but look back at the road behind me. It feels almost unreal, like two different lives lived by the same man. One life was filled with humiliation, fear, and failure. The other with resilience, growth, and triumph. Sometimes I still see that younger version of me. The man sitting in his pickup truck outside the factory, clutching a cardboard box of his belongings, drowning in shame. I want to reach back through time, put a hand on his shoulder, and tell him, "Hold on. The pain you feel today is the fire that will forge your future." I think about the nights I almost quit. The nights when debt collectors called, when the truck broke down, when the fridge was nearly empty. I remember the look in my wife's eyes when she doubted if we'd make it, and the look years later when she realized we had. Those moments remind me that success isn't built in comfort. It's born in suffering, in persistence, in refusing to let go when every bone in your body tells you to stop. Looking back, the money and the contracts are nice, but they're not what I treasure most. What I treasure are the lessons. That dignity doesn't come from a title. That humiliation can be your best teacher. That faith is stronger than fear. That leadership means serving others. And that family, above all else, is the reason we fight. Sometimes younger men ask me, if you could start over, what would you change? And I tell them honestly, nothing. Because every mistake, every scar, every setback was part of the story that made me who I am. If I had skipped the pain, I would have skipped the growth. I may have started as a broke, humiliated man, but I will leave this world as a man who built, who fought, who rose. And if my story teaches anything, it's this. You don't need to be extraordinary to win. You just need to refuse to stay down. Lesson: when you look back one day, you won't treasure the easy days. You'll treasure the hard ones, because they're the ones that shaped you into the person you became. Now at 60 years old, I don't measure my life by the size of my bank account or the number of trucks in my fleet. I measure it by the legacy I leave behind. When I walk into one of our offices and see men and women, some younger than my kids, some older than me, working hard, providing for their families, and carrying themselves with pride, I realize this was never just about me. It was about building something that outlives me. My children, who once asked, "Daddy, are we going to be okay?" now run parts of the business themselves. They've taken what I started with scraps and sweat and are turning it into something even bigger, something stronger. That, to me, is success. Not just starting a business, but creating a future. Sometimes I sit on the porch in the evenings, sipping coffee, and neighbors stop by. They still talk, but now the whispers aren't about failure. They're about inspiration. They ask, "How did you do it?" And I smile, because the answer isn't complicated. It's the same lesson I've been living my whole life. Don't quit. When you fall, rise. When you're humiliated, learn. When you're broke, fight. I want people to remember me, not just as a man who owned companies, but as a man who turned pain into purpose. A man who taught others that you don't need to be born rich, gifted, or lucky to succeed in America. You just need grit, faith, and the will to keep moving forward. If there's one thing I leave behind, it's this: failure isn't final. The kid from the factory floor, the man who sat broke and humiliated in his truck, became the owner of multiple businesses. If I can do it, anyone can. So, to the next generation, to my children, to my workers, to anyone out there listening, I say this: don't run from your scars. They are the proof you survived. Build your life brick by brick, with courage as your foundation, and you'll leave behind a legacy worth more than gold. Lesson: true success isn't in what you earn, but in what you leave behind. Legacy is built when your story inspires others to rise after their own fall.